overseas, movies all over. You're probably wondering what does that have to do with school choice or economic development or the environment. And we're going to come back to that. Let me tell you a little bit more about myself, really about who I was. This was my life. Traffic. I drove 30 miles to work every day, 30 miles back, 60 miles a day, over a 7-year period while I was at Paul University, which is in that picture here. That was over 100,000 miles commuting. I was at Paul. The Paul is right from that red building that you see right there. It's a white building in front. It was a nice place to be a finance professor. It's 3 blocks from the Chicago Options Exchange, 7 blocks from the Chicago Mercantile Exchange, down the street from the Board of Trade. For someone that did research in derivatives, it was a nice place to be. They had a huge MBA program. But I didn't live in Chicago. I lived in Naperville, Illinois. Why Naperville? In fact, down here in the right-hand corner, Chicago Magazine, across the top there, why everyone loves Naperville. Well, the reason was good schools. Naperville had very good schools. And I had 3 young children. And so I beat that path back and forth over the same stretch of ground, day after day for 7 years. And at the end of that time, after 7 years, I had tenure. I weighed 20 pounds more. Assaulting there. My wife assures me that wearing a tie makes you look thinner. My teenage boy told me I should wear 2. I'd also developed diabetes. And it turns out I had company in that regard. U.S. News and World Report, is your commute killing you? My commute, in fact, was killing me. The long commutes are shown to, particularly for people who are otherwise sedentary, who have jobs or are sitting at desks. If you have a long commute, that's 2 extra days. That's increases blood pressure, increases the risk of diabetes, increases a range of other problems. It's just not good to be sedentary all the time. At UCLA, the chair of environmental health sciences, we've built America in a way that is, I believe, fundamentally unhealthy. It prevents us from walking, it inhibits us from socializing, it trims trees and things that make our air quality better. We could not have designed an environment that's more difficult for people, for people's well-being at this point. 2% of the United States gross domestic product goes to treatment of diabetes. It's a crushing economic impact. It's a health problem, long commutes. So, my commute was killing me. We resolved we need to move to Chicago to be closer to where I work. I enjoyed my job. The problem is the public schools in Chicago are really bad. A couple of years ago, teachers were on strike. They had a laundry list of all their complaints. There were a lot of problems with the schools. Unfortunately, when they settled, none of those problems got fixed. The teachers just got a pay raise. And you can imagine if the teachers need combat pay, it's not a great place to take your kids. Now, there are some magnet schools in Chicago, and there are a number of them. The process for getting into that magnet school is that students are selected by a computerized lottery. There aren't any attendance boundaries, so you can apply from anywhere in the city of Chicago, so students from all over the city can apply. Now, the problem from my perspective was we didn't live in Chicago. What that meant was, what it means for many, thousands of people who move to the Chicago area with children every year, in order for us to get into a magnet school in Chicago, we needed to sell our house in Naperville, move to Chicago, enroll our children in the bad public schools, apply for the magnet program, wait for the lottery, and then pray that our children, if they're living process of getting tenure again. Now, it turns out that I'm not the only person leaving Chicago. This is a map of the changes in population in the Chicago area between 2000 and 2010. And the area in brown that you see, the dark brown, those areas lost more than 10% of their population in that 10-year period. This is the Detroitification of Chicago going on right now. Now you will notice there are some areas that are growing right there along the lakefront, some little purple areas. In those little purple areas, that's where, if you go on vacation to Chicago, that's where you'll go. And there are people there, but not people with school-age children, or not very many of them. This is a metric. You see that purple area up here again. This is a map showing the ratio of 5 to 9-year-olds to 0 to 4-year-olds in each of those communities. Now, across the country, there are about the same number of 5 to 9-year-olds as 0 to 4-year-olds. The ratio is 1. In areas where the ratio is greater than 1, you have people moving in when their children reach school age. In areas where the ratio is less than 1, you have children moving out when people are reaching school age. In those dark blue, dark purple areas, the ratio is less than 0.6, meaning 40% of the children are leaving with their families when they reach school age. In fact, in those dark purple areas, you have some neighborhoods where the ratio is 0.22. Almost 4/5 of the families are getting up and leaving Chicago when they hit school age. They're going to Naperville. We saw a van in August. You could be sure there was a 5-year-old in the family moving in. Inner city schools are a major contributor to continued urban sprawl. There's a flight out of many middle-class people because of schools. A couple gets married, and by the time their children get to age 5, they move. The New York Times noted, question starts to hang in the air sometime after the children arrive and the apartment in the city begins to feel a little tight. Should we consider moving to a house in the suburbs? If the deciding factor is the relative cost of each, the answer is quantifiable. Based on an apartment and a house in the New York metropolitan area, a suburban lifestyle costs 18% more than living in the city. It's actually cheaper to live in the city. It's the reason young people like to live there in many cases. Okay? But if you look at New York, you'll see a lot of dark purple in Manhattan. Despite the fact that Central Park is there and you would think that would be a nice amenity for somebody with children, it's not. They're moving to the suburbs. Staten Island down there is over 1, and if you get out beyond New York City, there are other areas that you see people moving in. And that's because the big caveat in all the calculations is private school. If the city dwellers decide to send their children to private school, that expense would instantly make the suburbs a bargain. That was my story. Now, the story is played out not just in the biggest cities. This is Atlanta. The brown area in South Atlanta, they lost population between 2000 and 2010. It might surprise you to know, this is where I lived before I lived in Chicago, it might surprise you to know that the population of the city of Atlanta is less than it was in 1966. That's when the Braves moved there. The suburbs are really booming with people. If you look just below that little star, that's where you would find the Atlanta Braves team. The Olympic Stadium, Atlanta Braves, down in that area, down in the brown part. Has anybody up here ever been to a Braves game? Okay. If anybody else wants to see the Braves play in Atlanta, go soon, because they're moving to the suburbs. It turns out that if you lose the middle class, eventually you lose the businesses that are supported by the middle class. All of this is linked back, of course. The environmental issue here is that those long commutes are about burning a lot of gas, a lot of petroleum. And that petroleum and commuting, it's almost synonymous. There's been some academic work that's been done in the past by a guy named Tebow. This was sort of an early paper. Tebow's a hero of mine, not the Tebow you've seen on television. In 1956, he wrote a paper Tebow identified. And we've all seen that, we all understand it. There have been a number of other studies since then that have extended this idea about how other issues, so these bottom three items, like economic segregation. This process of voting with your feet leads to areas in the community where incomes and wealth is high and other areas where income and wealth is low. It leads to what's called a spatial mismatch by sociologists. What that means is there are people who live in areas where there are no jobs and they can't get to where the wealthy people are spending the money or creating jobs. So even though there are jobs that may be wanting in one area, the people who need them can't get there. Caused by these lines on the ground that are caused this sorting across space within the city. Also, income inequality becomes worse because in the areas where there are no jobs, people can't get the first step on that ladder of success and begin to move up, they get left behind. Interestingly enough, the same year that Tebow wrote that paper, the Federal Aid Highway Act of 1956 was passed. That's the interstate highway system. And you can see here the number of vehicles per car has skyrocketed since then. What we now have, instead of voting with your feet as Tebow envisioned it, when very few people actually had cars, is people now vote with their cars. When I lived in Chicago or in Naperville, I lived out a long way. I drove over not one line, not one high school line, but I probably drove over 20 of them, getting from one place to the next, so we could sort more aggressively and at farther distance than we ever could before, because of that particular change and this natural phenomenon of people voting with their feet. After I moved to North Carolina, I met this gentleman. His name's Darrell Allison. Darrell Allison runs an organization in North Carolina called Parents for Educational Freedom North Carolina. And essentially they lobby for charter schools, for voucher programs, and for other school choice alternatives. They've been reasonably successful, more successful of late. The membership of Darrell's group is probably 85% African American. And the reason for that is that African American males in North Carolina, 40% of them don't graduate from high school. So there's a recognition that something is wrong. Interestingly, the money for his organization, I think, is disproportionately from sort of libertarian business people. Now, those communities don't agree on a lot of things. Libertarian business people feel like markets will do a better job of creating education opportunities. I was having this conversation with him over lunch as he was describing his organization, and I made the offhand comment. I said, I assume the environmentalists are with you. And it was complete silence. He looked at me and he said, why would they be? So I told him about my story of driving 60 miles a day out to the suburbs because the inner city schools didn't allow me to live with my family in the city. And he said, maybe they should be with us, but no, they're not. And I walked away from him thinking, well, maybe I'm wrong. But I've got tenure. And that means I can do research on anything I want to do. So over the course of the next 4 months, I sort of thought about this from time to time. And I thought, there ought to be some way of examining how school choice impacts the communities where those choices are being offered. And it wasn't, I started reading materials, there just wasn't very much out there. There wasn't anything out there that I could find. So that led me to the first project, which is It Makes a Village Residential Relocation After Charter School Admission, which is going to be published in Real Estate Economics, which is an academic real estate journal. It's been accepted, the date unknown, within a couple of months. In that instance, what we did is we got data from a charter school. It's hard to do. We actually asked 4 before we found one that would provide us with data. We got data from a charter school. Data from the applications that the families had made at the time they applied to go to the school. Now, I probably ought to tell you what a charter school is. It may mean different things in different places. In North Carolina, a charter school is a public school, and there are no constraints upon, there's no tuition, and if more people apply than can be admitted, there's a lottery. And one of the items about these schools is that many of them give preference, and this is a preference they can give, they give preference to the younger siblings or siblings of people that are already in the school. But basically, it's, in a sense, like a private school, except there are a few more administrative burdens that are placed on it. A private school with a little bit of a handicap in the lottery system. We got data from one of these charter schools. There were 662 families, and we could see the original address on the applications that the students, that the parents filled out, and that was in their permanent record, the first document that would go in there. And they kept that throughout the time the child was in the school. We were able to look at the address changes because we had subsequent information about where report cards were mailed and that sort of thing, so we could figure out who moved. And there were 176 families who moved. Interestingly, the ones who didn't move were more likely to live closer to the school already. What we were interested in beyond that was, okay, the ones who did move, how did they move? Now, I won't bore you with all the mathematics, but this is a Rose diagram showing the proportion of the families that moved in each direction, and the school was at 0. So if they started at the center and they moved toward the school, they show up in that big triangle. There were 54 families, I guess, that moved toward the 0. There were 4 that moved the opposite direction. They were strongly attracted to the school. When I say the school was attractive, I mean people wanted to get closer to it. Up at the top, you see a K value, 1.22. That is a measure, it's a statistical measure of how strong that attraction was. It's called a concentration factor. How strong that attraction was toward the school. That 1.22 was stronger than any study I could ever find on how people are attracted to work. We know that people don't like to live farther from work when they move, so there's a bias toward moving toward work. But the bias in none of the studies I could find was anything close to that. Turns out people care a lot more about their child's commute than their own. Now, if a picture is worth 1,000 words, a video should be worth more. So let me just show you, I created this earlier this year. The black dot that you see is the school's location. The other dots are 176 families that moved over time. Go back to where they started. See where they ended up. It's a very strong attraction. The implications of this, there are several. One, this school is a very strong magnet for family relocation. It was stronger than married jobs. We actually surveyed the parents to figure out where the parents worked at the time they moved, and they looked like all the other studies of how people move relative to work. They were normal people. They just cared more about the school. We looked at the value of the homes of people that bought, that sold and bought homes. It was pretty much the average for the county as a whole. These were not unusual people. They just had an unusual school. Schools that they wanted to be in, and they moved to be closer to them. data recently on another school. It's not as strong as this, it's stronger than jobs. Come on, second paper. Okay. School vouchers and home prices, premiums in school districts lacking public schools. Vermont has a school voucher program that is almost 150 years old. People don't know that. There are 200 school districts in Vermont. I think you have a lot here. 200 in Vermont. 90 of them don't have a school. 90 of them don't have an assigned high school. And if you live in one of those 90 counties without an assigned high school, you get, it's called a tuitioning system. Basically, you get a voucher. You get a scholarship. Your township will pay for you to attend school. And any of the public high schools in Vermont are about 100 private schools that have been identified as schools that you can attend. Most people who go to private schools go to like 6 or 8 of them. There are 6 or 8 relatively large ones. It's not a very big state. Having said that, there are people that go to high school outside the state, including up along the top there. There are children that are going to high school in Canada on Vermont vouchers. You can't, let me mention this, you cannot have both a voucher and an assigned school in Vermont. If there's an assigned school, you're not allowed a voucher. You only get that if there is no assigned school. What we were interested in knowing was, well, what's the value of that voucher? So we got data on almost 3,000 home sale transactions across Vermont. We got some economic data, demographic data. We figured out which homes were in areas where you were assigned to a school, which ones weren't. Test score quality, test scores so we could assess the quality of the schools. And then we basically asked the question, all right, what explains the value of a home? And we know a lot of things. Anybody who's ever been involved in real estate knows the number of bedrooms and bathrooms. By the way, log house has nothing to do with log cabins. That's a logarithmic scale. So, community characteristics, and then the last item, which was the one we really cared about, does the home get a voucher? What's the value of having a voucher? And we'll cut to the chase here. On average, the homes that were in tuitioning towns, after accounting for all the other stuff we know impacts value, the average home was worth 6% more if they had a voucher instead of being assigned to school. Over $8,000. If the school you were closest to wasn't very good, meaning there was a better school, a better public school within 20 miles of the one you would be assigned to, the difference between being on the side of the line that when you were assigned to the school and being on the other side of the line where you had to pick your own school was almost $25,000. People are willing to pay for choices. Go down at the bottom. Options have value in the fine print. It says, actually, that's no surprise to the finance professor. I was down the street from the options exchange. There have been fortunes made trading options. Here, the option is embedded in the house. You have to trade the house. Since I got started, there have been some other papers that have cropped up, including one that in Paris, unlike in Vermont, in Paris, you have both a traditional school system and about a third of the schools in Paris, a third of the high schools, are private schools with vouchers. That's an interesting situation. In the areas across Paris that have good public schools, home prices are high, where they're poor, home prices are low. But in the places where you have relatively poor public schools, but you have some private schools, because private schools aren't distributed evenly across Paris, in those areas, the value of the property, despite the fact that the public school you would be assigned to isn't very good, the value of the property goes up. In New York, there's to give you a couple of case studies. This is the location of Raleigh Charter High School. Raleigh Charter High School in that back building, it wasn't there yet. As you can see, this was a blighted area. There's no roof in the adjacent building. Turns out that in many cases, charter schools and schools that are funded by vouchers, there's a tendency for them to locate in blighted areas. The reason for that is they have to choose between spending money on facilities and on teachers. And if you can get cheap property, you can spend more on your teachers. In addition, there tends to be higher demand in places that are blighted because the people who are still living there recognize our schools aren't very good. So this is Raleigh Charter High School before they went in. I pulled this from Zillow a year ago. This was the subdivision that went in adjacent to Raleigh Charter High School after that school opened. The school in the back, the small one on the left, they were literally on the wrong side of the tracks. You can see the tracks there. They're on the wrong side of the tracks. The other building now has a roof. I was over there 3 weeks ago. There's a private equity firm that's moved into that building. Now, no good deed goes unpunished. Raleigh Charter High School, this area changed dramatically after they got there. So much so that when their rent came up to be renegotiated, the landlord said, "This area is a lot nicer than when you moved here." And they raised the rent, and Raleigh Charter High School had to move out. So they found another location. But what you see in this is a charter school as a blight fighter. This is a very interesting story. This is Santa Ana, California. Santa Ana is over 90% minority. 80%, just under 80% Hispanic. Main Street, you see the little bus stops along it. Main Street, back 15 years ago, was deserted. The buildings on either side were empty. And in a nearby city called Los Alamitos, in Los Alamitos, there was a successful choir director at a school. And his choir program grew dramatically. He had several hundred people in the choir music program at the school. Big enough that a point came when there were some budget issues, the decision was made, we really need to have a charter school focused on the arts. And this choir program and the other activities was to be spun out to be a charter school. The problem was, in Los Alamitos, as a charter school, people could come in from anywhere around, and folks in Los Alamitos said, it's going to cause a lot of traffic. We don't really want it. And so they couldn't find a site in Los Alamitos. The mayor of Santa Ana, actually his wife, was reading the paper, saw that there's this school that they're worried is going to cause too much traffic. He kept putting notes on his table in the morning at breakfast, and the mayor eventually contacted the gentleman who was starting the school and said, "We don't have any traffic downtown. This isn't an issue for us. We've got empty buildings and we'd like to help you get into them if you're willing to move here." And so down in this corner, that's one of the buildings they moved into, a bank building. Up here, there's another, what was the First Interstate Bank building, a 7-story tower there. That's another classroom building. Across the street, this was an empty church. It wasn't being used. But one of the great things about churches is that they've got statements. This is one of the orchestras of the Orange County School of the Arts. You can see the octagonal shape of the church, the stage in the front. Now, the mayor, being farsighted, he didn't just stop with this. He kind of went all in. If you look down here in the lower left-hand corner, that's another charter school. Raleigh, the Orange County School of the arts is a 7 through 12. That other charter school, unaffiliated, is a K through 6 school that also has a focus on the arts. And while you can't see it, off to the left of that empty lot, there's another charter school, which is a math and science charter school. In and around Main Street in Santa Ana, there are 3,500 kids going to school. The most impressive thing about this is not that at all. It's no longer blighted. What's really interesting is that lot right there. Because the developers come in, we've got all the improvements in. To build that. You can see in the foreground the image there, the church on the left, the other school building on the right, back